Hey guys, this is Brad from Blue Nile Farm. Welcome to episode number 12, which today we're going to be talking about ponds and how a pond can benefit you on our series on how to start a farm from scratch. When I bought my property, it did not have a pond. And to date, 30 years later, I technically have 2.5 ponds. I'm working on that half, and I kind of explain what that half actually means in a little bit. But a pond can serve many, many different purposes. And when you buy a property, whether it's a pre-existing farm or whether it's a farm that you're building from scratch and you're just clearing the land and you're developing it, a lot of times you look for ponds to serve multiple different purposes. And one of them is pretty clear that a pond is a great form of recreation. So if you're a fisherman, you love to fish, or you just want to occupy some time, you get in a pond, of decent size, you have some fish in it. Obviously, fishing is a great hobby for many, many people. I enjoy it. That's one of my favorite things to do is get, when I'm bored or it's late at night and I wanted to relax, I'll grab a fishing rod, run around the pond and fish. And I really enjoy that. And it's a good time. Secondly, if you're into swimming, if you're young kids and you have kids, swimming is great for ponds because you dive in, have a good old time, and they serve that purpose. So from a recreational standpoint, they're wonderful. And also from an aesthetics situation, nothing nicer than looking at a pretty pond, with fresh cut grass on your property, and it looks nice. And if you want to make it even look a little bit nicer with, say, a fountain for irrigation, those are great. And it really highlights the property and makes it look nice. But a lot of times, like for me, when I built my pond, and besides wanting those two issues of recreation for fishing and also the enjoyment of having my pond for just to look at it, my biggest problem when I bought my property, and I mentioned this before, is I needed a water supply. So that pond served me that purpose of being my main water supply for the house. And that's something that I really wish I would have done before I wasted my money putting in a well. And I wish I would have known about that before I put in a cistern. And when I built my house, it was in the winter time, and it wouldn't have been an optimum time even for these guys to put the pond in. It was too late in the year, and I was kind of stuck regardless, and I wanted to move in, and I had to put off putting in the pond for at least a year to 2 years after I got into my property. But there's another purpose behind dealing with ponds, is that especially when you've got raw land, a lot of times you got to move dirt around, and you might have low areas, you need high areas, and you want to use natural resources on your property that you can use to help you build uh, your buildings, and maybe building up a pad where it's off the low-lying areas and raising it up. So you need dirt, or fill dirt for that matter. So when you take a pond and you dig it out, you create fill dirt. You have topsoil, which is obviously good for organics. You can either sell it or use it, and you separate that from what's called fill, which would be your clay base on the bottom. And that clay, you want to pile it up and keep it. And a lot of people act like, oh, that's an eyesore, I want to get rid of it. But clay's a great thing to stockpile. And I stockpiled mine, and I used it uh, many times over. That's kind of why I have 2.5 ponds, is because over the years I've built barns and constructed buildings, and I've taken pre-existing low-lying areas and had to build up my base of clay to put the barns on those structures. So my barns are higher than the surrounding areas on my property, so that I don't have my barns, you know, getting hit with water and having water enter my barn. I see way too many properties over the years of farms I've went to and guys that put buildings up, and they didn't optimize their uh, they needed soil to build their barns up, and their barns are too low. So you want your buildings to be above everything else, and same thing with your house, so you're not getting flooded out at any time while you're on that property. So clay is a great base for your property. Now I can't speak for across the country, but a lot of times when you're going to build a pond, you should get with your soil and water in your county. It's basically a county agency through the state of Ohio, or my state's Ohio, but all states I think have a soil and water department or an agency that's state regulated. And a lot of times these guys will come out for free, and they'll help you choose a site for your pond, or even make sure you do a soil test And what a soil test, as far as doing a pond, is basically making a test hole, making sure you have the proper soil that will retain the water. See, and a lot of people, at least by me and from growing up, is when they hear about a pond, they think that your pond is filled naturally by a spring. And that's not necessarily the case. Most water and ponds, at least in my area, are filled by water because they're always placed in low-lying areas where water just happens to congregate. And that's where you want to get your pond. You want to catch surface water and drainage from maybe your property or your neighbor's property, and you want to catch that water and funnel it toward your pond, and that's how it fills. It's not filled by natural spring water. It's filled by groundwater getting collected and crossing, racing across the ground and filling up uh, in that pond. And it's just smart to do things like this because it keeps your land around that property dry, and you have a place to contain your water. And then, of course, if you can take that water and use it, that's the benefit. But remember, though, when you're building a pond, you always want to grab water, but you also have to have, when it overflows, you also want to have an out so it's traveled somewhere else. So a lot of times water is cycled from one area, then it's put into, say, a ditch, and that ditch will take that water that's being overflown to another area, or maybe it's pumped into a lower area where there's land, and it's just kind of reassessed. So, like, I have a problem right now because I have a neighbor adjoining not only my property but my neighbor's property, and the guy put a pond in, and he has an overflow that goes into the woods, and this water is going across my neighbor's property, onto my property, into a kind of like a ditch, into my pre-existing pond. And this pre-existing pond that I have is just basically a pond that I put there just so I can use clay to build up another area of my more barn sites. And I'm actually building new barns, so I'm going to be enhancing this hole and making it bigger this year and using more clay because I'm running out of clay and I need it for another barn. So the problem you have is that when people do that, you don't want to be stuck where this water's draining on your land. So it's basically running through my neighbor's woods, killing off his trees, and coming across my property, and I'm going to catch it and use it, and then I'm going to send it naturally to another ditch that goes across my other's neighbor into a river. And if you can get all your neighbors to work with you, you guys can create ditches. It's a lot better. But if they don't want to work with you, you kind of get in this weird relationship with your neighbors with ponds. But ponds are great tools because it keeps water from settling. So, like I say, my first pond I put in, I use it for a water supply for my house. And we actually use the clay to actually build up the height of my front end of my property so everything slopes into the pond. And my pond maybe would go down at most during the summertime when it's really, really dry and we're in a drought, maybe a foot and a half. But after a couple good rains, it's boom, it's right back up and it's right at the top. So, as long as you have a good fall in catching water from numerous acres around your property, you're normally pretty good. And a lot of reservoirs, that's how they work, is they catch water from farms and areas, and it comes into a watershed, and the water is actually falls into these reservoirs, and that's how we have big lakes all over our state. And most states, that's kind of what it does. So it's a great source of water as long as you design it properly. My second pond I put in the property that I own, I have a county used to have an old ditch that they used to maintain that went through several properties and kind of z'd across my property onto my neighbor's property and kept on going. But when I bought my property, it was all overgrown with trees and stuff, and I cleared it. And this area was always very wet and very soft. And I actually dug a pond in the middle of the ditch, and so I catch the water. So I already have a natural in, and now I have a natural out. And I just made a pond about a third of an acre, and I catch all the water that comes through that ditch, and then I use that clay again for my building site, for my barns. And again, it's used and it's handy to have. And like I say, lots of benefits to that. So if you use your land properly and you are able to benefit by a pond by either making your own soil that you can use, like the clay or in the topsoil, that's always a win, and you're really not wasting it because you're using it. And if you had to pay somebody to bring in clay, it's going to cost you a lot of money in trucking and so forth. So it's so much better when you could do it yourself. And it saved me thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And a pond in construction anymore, it's going to cost you probably $10,000 to $20,000 easy for a pond. It could be about a half acre in size. So depending on who's putting it in, it could be pricey. And if you go rent a bulldozer and an excavator, or just have the dozer, it's going to cost you a lot of money just to get a pond put in. And but it can be done. And if you don't have the familiarity of how to run a bulldozer, through a rental place, then you're going to be basically paying somebody to do so. And if you do rent a dozer, you just clearly need to know what you're doing to dig a pond. So there's tricks to it. And, there's grading that needs to be done. And most ponds, at least in my area of northeastern Ohio, they're about 10 feet deep. And that's pretty much the average of a pond's depth. And then from that standpoint on, it goes at a distance as far as, how many acres do you want it to be. And the only way you can figure out in your head is if you take it's kind of like a bowl. If you lay it flat, where it's flat, you don't see it. But when you take that bowl and you flip it, invert it upside down, you can see that mound from the bottom of the bowl. Well, it's the same thing with dirt. You got to visualize that whatever you invert that pond, that's going to be the amount of clay that you actually pull out of there. And it's a lot of material, thousands and thousands of yards. And it's very important to have a place to put it. And that's why I say, if you have a usable spot to use it, definitely apply it, because it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. And it's beneficial. Even if you store it and sit on it for a while, at least you have it to use it at some point. I mean, anytime I get clay, I use it and I rebuild my property up. And I've been doing that ever since I started with my farm. And there's so much value in having the clay to be used as a base. It makes a huge difference. And that's something that I wanted to point out. The other thing too is you definitely don't want to have a pond near a woodlot. And I know some guys like to put ponds near in the woods, but remember this: you're going to have a lot of leaves and branches and stuff falling in that pond, and they're going to rot, and they're going to just become debris that just plugs up your pond. You're better off to be kind of clear away from your forest areas. It'll be a lot better for your pond itself. Secondly, if you are around, say, beavers, around with trees and beavers, that's always a big problem. But the biggest problem that I have in northeastern Ohio is muskrats. And muskrats get into the side of your banks, and they dig holes, and they erode the water, and they create a big problem. So one of the best things you can do as far as dealing with muskrats is find somebody that traps them and have them come out on your property and trap them out. Because the bottom line is they're prolific, and they start breeding, and they dig all kinds of holes, and they cause nothing but trouble along the bank side. So over time, you're going to have problems with muskrats if you don't address that issue. And, I have it on my property. And the only way I'm going to actually clean it out is if I have to go around at some point with my excavator and dig it out. Another thing you want to do is keep your pond clean. A lot of guys let some of their ponds grow up with cattails, stuff like that. I want my whole pond all the way around to be clean. And so I try to keep it mowed at all times. And it looks a lot nicer. It's easier to use, easier to fish, and easier to enjoy it. So try to maintain a clean pond. It'll make a heck of a difference. Another big issue that I deal with ponds that is like a scourge in my life right now, especially because of the water that we use up by the house in this one pond, and we have a float on there, and that's how we get the water into the house through pumps, are geese. Geese are a big pain in the ass, and I'm going to tell you, the worst thing you do is once you start having a couple of geese, it turns into a flock, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. I'm to the point anymore that I have up to 50 to 100 geese on my pond sometimes at one time, and it drives me crazy. And you have to understand, a goose poops about 12 to 15 times a day. They produce a lot of shit, and they do nothing but make a huge mess. So if it's in your water supply, you're going to have shit all over your pond, all over your banks, all over your grass, and it's just a big mess. Because normally when you have a pond and you're trying to use it for water for your house, even if you don't drink it, you don't want to have all this excrement all in your pond. And so the worst thing you can do is have a ton of geese shitting all over the place. Because most of the time, if you have a pond, you're not going to allow your horses or livestock to be around that pond to maintain the grass or any of that. And also, when you have a pond, you have to be considerate also, especially on how deep it is, of animals getting into it, because you will have horses and cattle and so on and so forth could drown easily in your pond, and you definitely don't want them to have access. So you're better off to keep all livestock away from ponds unless you have it designed to be very shallow and for them to go in and wallow. But I prefer to keep animals completely away from ponds, and we fence all ours out because they don't want to have problems. And I know many neighbors that have had animals drowned in them. And it's just kind of a sad event. So you're better off not even to do that and just to keep them away, in my opinion. Uh, the other thing you need to deal with ponds, besides the geese problem, now one thing I want to talk about with geese too. There's a couple ways to deal with the geese problem, and you'll hear people using decoys, and then a lot of I even bought for my pond, and I don't even think it works. It's a flashing light that goes on at night. Supposedly keeps the geese away. I spent a lot of money on that. I don't think it works as good as it would. I would hope. Um, but what really works good to get rid of geese, just to shoo them away, and especially if because you're not allowed to shoot them, is basically getting a high-powered green laser. And with the laser, especially in the evening time, you don't want to shoot the geese with the laser, but you want to kind of chase them with the laser. And geese run away from the laser, and they fly away. Even in the daylight, if it's kind of cloudy, the laser will work, but in the bright sun, it doesn't work. And I think I need to get a more high powered laser. And the laser you have to get is very, very high powered. But I'll tell you what, it is probably the best thing to scare geese away is having a laser. And I suggest if you can, kind of stay on top of that a while, it's better than shooting at the geese. It's better than loud noises and booms. It's just a quiet, easy way of chasing them, just with that laser right behind them, and boom, the whole flock will take off. And as long as you stay on top of that, hopefully you can keep them away from your water supply up by the closest of your house. I have a lot of geese that go to the other two ponds, but I don't want them where my water supply is at the house. So I'm doing everything I can to deal with this issue, and it's just an ongoing battle. So if you get on a piece of property right away and you can attack the geese problem, you're in your best interest to do so because they're nothing but a pain in the ass. And they just got to go. They're just pain, and you just got to get rid of them. And once they start having babies, they'll never get away. They'll be repeating, going back to your barn, just like barn swallows come from a barn. Once you get barn swallows in your barn, you'll have them forever, and they just keep multiplying. And it's the same thing with geese. And you'll realize that geese after a while are just nothing but a pain in the ass. So that's my suggestion on the geese end of it. The other additional thing with ponds that I'd want to point out too is, as far as fish goes, Amurs are great. I love to have Amurs. They basically keep something down your algae in there, and you can put any kind of fish you want in there. Most people have bass and bluegill and stuff. Whatever's natural to your area, they're great fish to have. The one thing I want to point out too is the other issue that I have this last year is an algae issue, and I think the best thing to deal with the algae is to get some kind of irrigation pump. Well, maybe not. Yeah, I guess they call it irrigation pumps. Basically, to pump the water and agitate it, or have a fountain so you're able to kind of break up the top surface and keep algae from growing. That would be the best thing you could do, is to maintain that. Now, the other thing too is with a pond, another benefit is that having a pond is a good resource, for, say, a fire department. If you ever get a fire on your property or for your house, a fire department has easy access to that as a water supply. And sometimes for insurance companies, even though they can kind of ding you for having a pond, they also like the issue that you do have a pond, because it gives them a resource to use as a water supply. So like if you lived in California right now where all the fires are going, they would love you because they would have sucked your pond dry. But at least you have a water supply that you can actually use, and you'll be better off because of that. And I think it makes a big difference. Now, if you're farming and doing gardens or fruit trees, and you need a form of irrigation, or for nursery stock, a lot of times they have ponds and they drain out of that so they can kind of water their plants. So they have a lot of purposes for having a pond. And I suggest that it's something that really makes a farm property enjoyable is to have a nice pond. So look into ponds, look into something, especially if you can do it yourself. That will save you a lot of money. But ponds are a wonderful thing to have. I highly endorse them. I think they're great. And I just wanted to point out some of my views on ponds. I can't, I'm going to build a probably, I got to make up, get more dirt for a couple barns, like I said before. But I'm not opposed to put another pond in my property too, because I really like them. And what's nice, especially when I like to fish, if I fish one and I get tired of fishing, I go move to another one, and I'm always changing away, and I can have a full day of fishing and just to have a lot of fun, just catch and release and enjoying it. But ponds are really wonderful to have, and like I say, I enjoy mine, and I think you'll enjoy them too if you ever get a pond. Get something big too. Don't put yourself in this little water hole. Make it a quarter, a third acre, a half acre, even an acre pond. That's enjoyable. The bigger the pond, a little bit much better it is. And I remember when I was a kid, neighbors had some little tiny pond, and it was way too small. Just don't make it a little mud hole. Just get yourself something like I said, about a third acre. Those are nice sized ponds and go on up in size, and they're enjoyable. So look into ponds. I hope all you guys enjoy them. I do, and it's just one of my suggestions for making a good country life. So let me know what you guys think, and I'd appreciate some comments if you guys have any. But enjoy the farm and enjoy the pond. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video on episode number 12 about ponds. Hopefully you gained a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of insight into the ponds and what we can do with them and how it could benefit you. Also, we're going to be moving into episode number 13. We're going to talk about equipment. We're going to assume that you've now have purchased a property, and whether you're buying a pre-existing property or you're just moving into raw land, you're going to build your house. We're going to start talking about equipment that you're going to need to start working that property and things that will help you out down the road. And we're going to transition to all kinds of different topics that are all related to the country lifestyle or owning a farm. So hopefully you're following the series. Hopefully you're enjoying them. And we're going to get into a lot more depth and hopefully topics that may be more near and dear to your heart. So with that said, hey guys, take care, and I'll see you guys soon.